there, I'm AJ. Welcome to Outdoors Podcast. If this is your first time checking out a video, thanks so much for stopping by. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below so that you get notified of all the future videos on fly fishing, backpacking, the outdoors in general that we'll have coming out shortly. Today is my essentials for fly tying video. This is what I've learned about fly tying over the last 8 or so months that I've been involved. I'm certainly no expert. I'm not a pro by any means. I don't tie for anybody. I just do it as a hobby, but I've learned quite a bit in the last 8 months. I go to class pretty religiously just about every week for the last 8 or so months. So I thought I would go ahead and show you really what you need to get started, some of the basic tools, techniques, and materials that you're going to be using on a regular basis, and some of the terminology that goes along with it to keep you a little bit more informed. So I'm going to start out with the tools, then we'll talk about some of the materials, and then we'll end with the techniques. This is not an exhaustive talk on fly tying, just some of the basic stuff that you need to get going. So the first thing that you need in fly tying is some way to hold a hook. Now, vices come in a lot of shapes, sizes, and varieties. I would say as far as the quality stuff goes, there's probably 5 or 8 main brands. The 3 that you see the most, I would say without fail, are Regal, Renzetti, and Peak. Now, I don't own a Peak, but hopefully I'm going to get some footage of one of my buddies that has one and really enjoys it. I know everybody that has a Peak really like theirs. Shout out to my buddy TN out on the West Coast. But I have actually a Regal vise and I have a Renzetti vise, and oddly enough, I've kind of combined the two for my personal preference. I really like the simplicity of my Regal vise, but I really like the base, the pedestal that came with the Renzetti that I have, and my girlfriend Sarah uses the Renzetti when we go to class like we are tonight, so it works out for both of us. The Regals work really simply. You just pull on this lever here, and that basically activates the jaw, which is right here. That's what you would use to put your hook in. And so essentially you hold everything in fly tying. You hold, there's lots of exceptions to every rule, but around the bend of the hook, you just grab that in the jaw of the vise. You put that perpendicular or parallel to the ground so that that is basically running straight even with your table. And then this allows you to manipulate the hook and apply materials to the hook, which is what allows you to tie flies. I'm going to show you some of that stuff as we go. So the Renzetti vices are set up a little bit different. They are what we would call a true rotary vise. So they actually spin and allow you to manipulate the vise, sometimes more than just your hand, which is, like I said, I'll show you here in a second. But just about any vise that you buy that's of good quality should hold the hook nice and solid for you so you can really manipulate it with the thread. And then there should be some ability typically for you to be able to kind of inspect your work. But really holding the hook is most important. Now, vices come in 2 styles. They come in pedestal and then they come in C-clamp. Now, the C-clamp ones will grab onto your table with a supplied clamp and actually grab on, and they sit more at the edge of the table. And then you have the pedestal vices. Now, all of these do come out for the most part of these pedestals. You can get different down stems here, which then this vise can be used in a Regal or a Renzetti C-clamp if I wanted to use it that way. The particular way I purchased this vise, or actually it was given to me as a Christmas present, was as a pedestal. And that's the way I like it. I just really kind of like the versatility of being able to move this around wherever I want it. So I have this set up the way it works for me. Actually, here tying at the house, I have this more elaborate kind of wooden base that I made with cups and little drawers for things. But when I'm out at class or when I'm just moving around, this is the setup that I like. On top of the vise, you need some basic tools. And quite frankly, we're going to leave these 2 out for a second. Really what you need are 3 basic tools to get started. You need a bobbin holder. So this actually holds the thread. The thread goes into the bobbin holder just like that. And there's lots of different styles of bobbin holders, but the basic ones do it like this. The thread goes up through the tube and out. And then you grip this like this, and you use your palm to apply pressure, which dictates how easy it is to pull the thread out as you're making wraps, which dictates how tight you're wrapping the thread around the hook, holding your materials in place. Again, I'll show you that here shortly. So you need a bobbin. You need a good pair of very fine tipped, very sharp, small scissors. Now you use these all the time in fly tying. You're constantly removing either thread or materials, excess materials with a pair of scissors. So having a very small, fine tipped pair of specific fly tying scissors is really preferable. These run anywhere from, I would say, $4 up to say $30 and up. A good pair of scissors will probably cost you $15 to $20. A good bobbin will probably cost you anywhere from, say, $5 to $25. And then lastly, you need what's called a bodkin. Now, a bodkin serves a couple of different purposes. It's great for kind of getting in and manipulating little fine things. If you've got a piece of thread that you really want to shift into a different position, a bodkin can be helpful. You can also use these for fluffing out some dubbing, which we'll talk briefly about in a second. And these are also really great for applying head cement if you're trying to really kind of finish off a particular fly in a way using some chemical head cement. These can be really great. So those are the three basic tools that I would start with. I made this little box for myself just to hold them all in a vertical position so they're not all over my table. I'm kind of an organizational guy. Myself, I prefer 2 additional tools for fly tying. I like a small pair of hemostats. These are really helpful for smashing the barb on my hooks, which I tend to do really kind of from the get-go. I don't really leave my hooks with a big barb, and I found that a pair of hemostats is really nice for doing that. But it's also, if I'm trying to show somebody a small fly, it's great to be able to just grab them in the hemostats and hand them the hemostats. That way they can check out the fly and take a peek at it without damaging any hackle or anything that I've done. Hackle is a term that you'll learn as you get into fly tying. But it's just nice to have a little pair of hemostats, so I made a spot for those in my little tool caddy. And then lastly, you do use a decent amount of wire in fly tying, and using your good scissors to cut that wire is kind of a no-no. You're going to dull your good, expensive scissors pretty quickly. These were $4. They're specifically designed for fly tying, and if this is what you're getting going with, they're great for fly tying. However, I have just a little pair of junk scissors for cutting my wire ribbing or any of the body wire that I'm using, which we'll talk about here shortly. So 5 main tools in my tool caddy: bobbin, scissors, bodkin, a little pair of hemostats, and then a pair of junk scissors. That's one of the primary tools for fly tying. Lastly, I typically bring a pair of readers with me when I tie or to class. I have really good vision. I've had good vision my whole life, but sometimes when you're tying little bitty tiny hooks into the 18 and 20 or so size, a pair of readers, these are 2 times magnifications, really just help see some of the detail stuff. I can take them on and off easily. They kind of rest on the bridge of my nose so I can go up and down. And these are like, I don't know, 10, 15 bucks at Walgreens. They're Foster Grants. They're nothing special. I also have a little tool or a little material caddy that I made. It's just a little box with some craft foam in the bottom of it. When I'm here at the house, whether I'm using my big base or my smaller pedestals, this just kind of helps keep things off the table and organized. I can keep extra flies in here. I can keep feathers and all kinds of different things in there. It's just kind of nice to have a little caddy. Speaking of, using one of these vices, the Regals, the Renzettis, the Peaks, you can tie anything down to, and this is again where those little hemostats come in. They're kind of handy. You know, this little bitty tiny, I think this is a 20 or a 22 midge, might be somewhere in that range. Little bitty tiny guy, which is basically just some thread on a hook with a little tiny bead on it. You know, up to something much larger, and I could certainly tie something much larger than this, but this is a nice, you know, classic size woolly booger in either a 10 or a 12, I'd say, on a streamer hook with a bead, and maybe even down to an 8. So you can tie anything from, you know, those in between, and then something even a little bit more complicated I did recently, which is one of these wire body stone flies. So you could tie something like that. Lots of different sizes, varieties, and shapes and sizes. So essentially to do that, you're going to be tying different materials. You might be using some yarn like this chenille yarn. This comes in packages like this on kind of a spool. You might be using some feathers like this Coq de Leon, which comes in packages like this. You might be using a feather more like this hen saddle feather for dry flies and hackle. That comes in packages like that, little kind of saddles. You might be using some material called dubbing, which is kind of a fluffy, fibrous material that can have all kinds of different additives to it. That comes in little packages like this. So it takes all of these different materials. Talked about earlier, spools of wire. You might also be using spools of either lead or lead-free wire that this adds weight to your fly and helps it sink in the water. So a great way to get started in fly tying, at least it was for me, would be to attend a local class if there is one at a fly shop available to you, or find a club like the Ozark Fly Fishing Society, I believe it's called, or Ozark Fly Fishermen's Club. Great groups that get together. Having somebody that knows what they're doing, being able to help you really see the intricacies of each of the techniques is very, very helpful. But being able to go to a class is really, really great because you've got people that you know are there specifically to help you get better and learn some of the techniques. I'm going to take this, put this down through my bobbin holder, bring the string out. So the basic technique, and you're going to be seeing this backwards, but is basically an away from you, over the top, back towards you motion of wrapping thread around the hook. And that's how all materials are held on. So I'm basically wrapping this thread over this tag end back towards the bend of the hook. And some of the terminology that you'll hear in fly tying when talking about the hooks and some of the things is take some wraps, right? So take some wraps would be take a couple of wraps of thread around the hook. The flat part is what's called the hook shank. The bend of the hook is the part that goes down and around. You've got the point of the hook here at the very front of the tip, the part that's actually pointy. You've oftentimes, now I smashed mine, got the barb, so you'll hear take some wraps back towards the bend and let your thread hang just over the barb of the hook. So that would mean take these wraps like I've done, and then let my bobbin hang so that the thread is actually directly in line with where that barb was. Up here you've got the eye of the hook towards the very front where you would tie on your line or your leader, your tippet. All three kind of the same terminology towards the end of your fly fishing line. And then you'd take some wraps forward towards the eye, and they talk about it kind of in proportions, right? So you might start a third of the way back down the hook shank and start it there. So this would be kind of a third of the way down the hook shank if I used the hook shank in lengths. And that would allow me to tie in materials like, for example, this chenille that we might use for a body. So I would take the thread, I would hold the chenille going down the length of the hook like this with a big part of it hanging off the back. And I would essentially take some wraps over the top of that chenille. And as you get better, you learn how to keep the chenille on top of the hook, and you kind of pull it up and back. And that hopefully keeps the chenille towards the top of the hook shank. And then I'm going to take some wraps forward, and that chenille is held in place. And this is the last technique we'll show on our essentials video today. I'm going to trim that chenille off the front, which kind of gives me a nice smooth surface. I'm going to bring my wraps up to just behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to do a half hitch, which I'll explain in another video later. That's one of the basics. And then I'm going to take this chenille, and in the same direction that I wrap my thread, I'm going to wrap it around the body of the hook in touching concentric wraps like this. Now when I get to the front, I'm going to take my left hand, grab the bobbin, 2 wraps behind it over the top of that material, and then 2 or 3 wraps in front of that material. And that's actually going to anchor this in place. So I can trim now this material away this excess and do another half hitch. And now I can trim this bobbin away, trim that thread, and that's the process that's used for essentially all of fly tying, is wrapping thread over the top of materials, tying them in place. This is where I would normally have my little trash bin, tying them in place, and now you have that material attached to the hook, not going to come off, held in place, fishable from this end, and that's essentially the basics of fly tying tools, materials, and techniques. Nothing too basic or nothing too complicated. This is the essential stuff that you need: a vise, 3 basic tools, a hook, and some materials to tie in. Go find a class, check out some videos online, get some materials, and start trying it out. I think you're going to enjoy the whole heck out of fly tying. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit like. It really helps out the channel, and definitely subscribe and turn on notifications for future videos. Thanks so much for stopping by. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook, as well as at www.outdoorspodcast.com. See you on the next video. Thanks so much.